Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very important subject, a very important topic, and unfortunately, an important topic that has not been really touched upon by Muslim scholars lately. And we don't usually talk about this much in Muslim households, especially. The absent father, growing up without a father, both for a male and a female child, how it affects them psychologically, and is it something that can be cured, or is the trauma so much that all adult life of a fatherless childhood is spent in post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD? Pertinent questions, right? So let's talk about this very quickly, inshallah, in today's short and sweet podcast. Join me, and inshallah, together, let's learn something about this very important topic. Yalla, Bismillah. الحمد لله الذي أنزل الفرقان وجعله هدى للناس وبشرى للمؤمنين والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المتطهرين وعلى أصحابه الراشدين المهديين وبعد. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. First things first, we need to understand why this is a lesser talked subject in Muslim households and by Muslim scholars. It has primarily an important reason. You see, when usually the Western world talks about an absent father, and I'm talking about the recent times. I'm not talking about classical old scholarship. I'm not talking about the classical old academia. I'm talking about the relative modern era of scholarship and academia. When they talk about an absent father, they are usually blaming the father for it. And so the sole responsibility of keeping a family together lies heavy on a father's shoulders. And so the father is absent, the child is fatherless because of the father himself. They usually do not take into account the reasons behind the split of a family. Even if a father is absent because of his demise, if a father has died, well, in any case, in the narrative, they'll frame it in a way where you'll find out that, okay, this as well is father's fault if he died earlier than what is naturally understood. So it's strange, really. I'm going to refer you to a book which I think is a very important book in this context on this subject. And that book also places the burden of keeping a family together on the shoulders of father alone. In Muslim households, it is understood, generally in Islam, it is understood that when a family splits, it cannot be just because of one person. Exceptions are there. We're not talking about exceptions. Exceptions are not the rule. Exceptions are not the generally understood guidelines. You cannot base generally understood guidelines on exceptions, right? So exceptions are there. Sometimes a woman is exceptionally bad or crooked or criminally bad. Sometimes a man is more so. But generally speaking, you cannot clap with one hand alone. Both parties are to be blamed in a relationship, in any relationship. It just so happens that one party is a bit of a more of a culprit than the other one. So while both parties are to be blamed, you have to see, and this is what the courts see and decide all the time around the world, which party is more to be blamed. Slightly more to be blamed, a little bit more to be blamed. Which party played an active role in this conundrum, in this mishap, and so on and so forth. But you'll have to understand that when a relationship breaks, the blame will have to fall on both the parties involved in that relationship. So, in Muslim households, in Muslim scholarship, generally it is not talked about in the way that the Western academia frames it. Nonetheless, everybody understands that the effects of fatherless growth are devastating. Devastating. And by the way, on a side note here, a very important note here, and I am addressing especially Muslim world, particularly talking about Muslim world right now. Women, Muslim women, should give this a second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th thought. They should take into consideration, they should take into account the devastation that is experienced by the progeny when a household breaks. And I'm addressing the women because generally it is understood, and this is the credit, this is an accreditation for the women, that they are the linchpin that holds the family together. They have been sacrificing for centuries, and they are praised for it. And they have to sacrifice a little bit more if they want the family. That they'll have to, like, okay, let's for a minute assume, and for the sake of argument accept, that the men are to be blamed here. It is a man's world, it is a man's fault that a family breaks. The women need to play an active role. They need to increase the level of their patience, maybe sacrifice a little more, and ajruhum indallah. This is something that you get a reward for from Allah. Forget about people. Forget about people. What can a human being give you at most? So the reward really is indallah. The ajr really is indallah. This is just a side note. And so the effects of fatherlessness on human psyche are not to be taken lightly. This is not a trivial matter. There are multiple types of complexes that are developed in human psyche if a father is not present. And it's not just about the split of the family. A father can very much be there, but not physically present, doing a job, doing a business all the time, on trips all the time, absent all the time. Or sometimes it so happens that the woman, the wife, excludes the father from the life of the household. This happens normally. Usually, if you take a look around, especially in the subcontinent, this often happens. Especially nowadays, this is a kind of a disease, an ailment that is rampant. It's a kind of power play. I'll come to it why it is particularly so, but generally speaking, maybe power play, maybe other things involved. A woman is listening too much to the wokist narrative, to the LGBTQ plus narrative. They are more prone to the fifth wave feministic narrative. And so the ailment then seeps deeper. The infection goes deeper. Effects of that you can see on our youth, especially the youth of the subcontinent. The kind of children you're bringing up, because you're excluding the father one way or the other. And after split especially, it is extremely devastating for a child to grow up that way. Multiple traumas. And these traumas run so deep in the psyche that some of the times, in fact most of the times, 50-50, let's say 50% of the time, those children who grew up fatherless, they end up breaking their own families as well. When later on in their adult life, when they have their own family, their own children, their own spouses, they tend to break that because they're looking for that fulfillment. They're looking for that absent father all the time. And it is really a very sad matter, a dark matter, that we should all be aware of. You should teach this to your children at some point in time. You should have a talk with them about this subject, because they're going to grow up, they're going to marry, they're going to have children, inshallah. And I'm going to refer you to a book. This is the book by Susan E. Schwartz, The Absent Father Effect on Daughters. I think it's a very good read. It's a book that's neither too academic nor written by some Tom, Dick and Harry. She's a doctor, she's a psychiatrist, she's trained in Jungian psychoanalysis. So she brings a lot of references. Also, a word of caution, this book is not published by a very good editor, it seems, because there are a lot of typos in the book. And I'm not talking about just mistakes, I'm talking about typos, which is outrageous, really. It's published by Routledge, and one has come to expect high standards from a publisher, from an academic publisher like Routledge. So anyways, it's a good read. I found it quite informative. I found it academically enjoyable to dwell into this subject with Dr. Schwartz. She makes some excellent points. Again, she's coming from a feminist point of view, and I'm not saying necessarily a wokist, fifth wave feminist point of view, but still a very feminist point of view nonetheless. And she's particularly talking about the effects of the absence of father on daughters, on the female progeny. And she makes some excellent points. And let me show you actually one or two of these points. This is the book, Susan E. Schwartz, The Absent Father Effect on Daughters. And it's a lengthy read, especially considering the fact that it has academic references in it, so you need to sit down really and study it. But this is page 9. This is one of the earlier chapters from the book called The Parallax, and she talks about the parallax effect on the psyche of the child that's going through the absence of the father. By the way, a lot of you keep asking me which software do I use for PDFs, for reading PDFs. I use multiple software. One of my favorite software is Nebo. It's cross-platform and it really works well, and this is Nebo that you're looking at. So yeah, if you really want to buy one piece of software for the purposes of making notes and reading PDFs. I think Nebo cuts it. So this is a chapter called The Parallax, and she writes, from this she learns self-doubts. From this, meaning from the absence of father, right? Let's also read from here, from the beginning of the section, his story of lack. And still the figure of the father remains associated with repression, misalignments, and lack of development. This is a current story with a long history of lack. In the past, the importance of the father for his daughter was forgotten or denied. The deleterious effect on daughters until relatively recently remained insufficiently explored and generally ignored. Well, doctor, will take your word for it. I mean, I disagree, but okay. In the father's absence, the daughter becomes dominated by destructive impulses, cut off from her instincts. And you are building on the scholarship previously available on this subject. I don't think this is your original find, doctor, that in the father of the absence, the daughter becomes dominated by destructive impulses. I think Jung has written about it. I think others have written about it. So really saying that the importance of the father for his daughter was forgotten or denied, I don't think that's the case. Anyways, let's proceed. In the father's absence, the daughter becomes dominated by destructive impulses, cut off from her instincts. Her personality is rooted in his lack. So her personality becomes rooted in the father's absence. From this, she learns self-doubts. Her truthfulness waylaid in nameless disjunctions. When a daughter cannot exist safely and independently in the eyes of the father, it can bring about a disassociative denial of self-agency. Who's saying it? I'm saying it? No. Dr. Schwartz is saying it. She's a Western academic, a feminist. Well, I can't say she is a feminist because she doesn't say that herself, but she comes across as one. A denial of self in relationship and fear of love. Very important. Please pay attention to this. A denial of self in relationship and fear of love. A female child is developing this tendency from earlier on because of this childhood trauma. So if she's denying herself and she's afraid of love, then what does that mean? What does that become? It means that in her own relationships later on in life, she'll be afraid of love, she'll be denying herself, and that could contribute towards breaking up a family. Relationships feel like they have to be controlled. She becomes watchful of the other and loses touch with herself. So no trust, needs to control the relationship all the time, because in the absence of the father, she has to become the father. In the absence of the patriarch, of the male counterpart that is needed for her feminine development, she becomes overwhelmed with the male energy. And that male energy, you take a look around, you'll often see that the girls that have daddy issues, they'll dress up more like men. You know, they're early on, they're like tomboys. They'll try to dress up in a way that kind of gives out an impression of power, like rugged clothes, maybe not very womanly clothes that are associated generally with delicacies, with the femininity, because femininity is generally looked upon as something weak. Women are looked upon as something weak, right? That's part of their charm, damsel in distress. So they'll try to, from early on in their life, they'll try to somehow dress up and behave in a manner where they come across as more manly than feminist, than full of female energy, than full of femininity, if that makes any sense, right? So you can see that, you can actually observe this phenomenon around. And statistically speaking, this is a psychological thesis. I won't say a fact because this is a thesis, and it depends if you can call it proven or not proven. It depends on how you look at the researches that have been carried out. So the point being made here is you will compensate for your childhood trauma, whichever childhood trauma that is. This is one of the major traumas. This is one of the major mishaps that can happen to a child, male or female, irrespective of whether they are male or they are female. Also very important to note here is that we're not saying, nobody is claiming that they become clinically insane or that they cannot function in human society or that they cease to function. They function. They are not insane. We're not talking about insanity. We're talking about traumas. Traumas are a part of life. Every one of us, every single one of us goes through traumas at a given point in time. If there are exceptions to this, if there is somebody out there who has never experienced trauma in the whole of their life, well, congratulations, mashallah alaikum. And there are therapies available for all kinds of traumas. You get therapy. It's just that it's not very common in third world countries. It's not very common amongst Muslims. And I'll come to that in a minute. I'll come to what are the remedies for this trauma. If a child grows up fatherless, what are the remedies for it? Can it be cured? Can the PTSD be cured? And I'll come to that in a minute. So what she's saying, what Dr. Schwartz is saying here, and we're looking at page number 9. She's saying relationships feel like they have to be controlled. She becomes watchful of the other and loses touch with herself. Lack of trust. Without sufficient emotional connection, a daughter's subsequent attachments are shaped with distance, lack of trust, and personal anxiety. Very carefully, please, let's read this again. Without sufficient emotional connection, a daughter's subsequent attachments are shaped with distance, lack of trust, and personal anxiety. So there's lack of trust. Whatever relationship she now makes herself, she enters into in her adult life, there will be a lack of trust, there will be a distance, and personal anxiety. Now, at least you'd agree with me that two most important things for a relationship are trust and respect, more than love. And we have read here that she also has fear of love. So she is afraid of love, she's got no trust, and there can't be any respect when there is personal anxiety and distance. So if these three things are lacking in a relationship, can that relationship go on? It's a recipe for disaster right there. And then people wonder, oh, but why did this marriage break? Sometimes it's the man in the marriage that has grown up fatherless. Sometimes it's the woman in the relationship that has this trauma, that has this post-traumatic stress disorder that she's fighting with, grappling with all her life. She's looking for that absent father. Her personality, her very personality is shaped, is forged in that fatherlessness. And that really is a huge problem, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. If a man has grown up In a fatherless household, they'll develop other personality traits, but the basics would remain the same: fear of love, distrust, distance, controlling nature. This would remain the same. They might develop aggression, and males often do. They find more chances to indulge in drugs, generally speaking, than women. And you must have seen around your town, your city, your country, youth indulging. I'm not talking about the ones who indulge in such sinful things for thrill, for excitement, for recreation. You'll see this with students, with youngsters who are very depressed. This anxiety, it doesn't leave them. And who's to be blamed? The parents, equally, both father and the mother, both of them. Sometimes a father more so, sometimes a mother more so. If a mother grew up fatherless, that family is bound to break. There is just no other logical outcome, is there? This is the main problem that we are looking at. So, and then she makes another excellent point, and I think this is very important. Satisfaction in life is limited. Adulthood feigned rather than fulfilled. Just as secure attachment shows the positive impact on daughter's development, insecure attachment impacts development of the negative father complex. Girls whose early childhood is characterized by father absence can grow up on either extreme of demeaning or lauding the paternal. So it can go either way, both sides of the equation. Nevertheless, even if they are lauding the paternal, they'll still have personal anxiety, lack of trust, and distance. And this is very problematic. This is extremely problematic. So, let's talk about the remedies. And there are some remedies in the book as well. Of course, she's a psychiatrist, she's a trained psychiatrist, so she's talking about the therapeutic aspects and how you face your fears and how you come to an understanding that, okay, this is a complex that I have, and then you work through it, you work your way through it, 7 steps of denial, acceptance, healing process, and whatnot. But let me tell you this: a Muslim should not develop any of these complexes. A Muslim child that grows up, Allah says, La taqnatu min rahmatillah. Allah's rahmah is overpowering everything. Rahmati wasi'at kulla shay. Don't lose hope, don't lose faith in Allah's rahmah, in Allah. Allah tells you, Indahu ajalim musamma, that everything happens on its given time, and its record is kept with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever happened for a reason, and ultimately there's a plan that is being followed, and Allah knows best. And when you think like that, and when you do tawakkul, when you believe in Allah, really there is no place for anxiety in a Muslim's life. And the children that grow up fatherless in Muslim households should justfully look at the situations, keep their relationship with the father when they grow up, maintain a healthy relationship, look at why the marriage was really broken, talk to their parents about it, keep their faith in Allah, and really, ala bi dhikrillahi tatmainul qulub, keep remembering Allah. And this is the number one remedy for any trauma, And I'm not just saying this just like that. If you look at the statistics and if you look around, Muslim children who have grown up fatherless and were really Muslims who have a firm belief in Allah, they have normal, healthy, fulfilling lives. So anyways, I won't stretch this beyond what is needed for the subject, and so I'd like to finish on this note. Maybe I'll come back to this some other time, maybe in greater detail. Maybe I'll read the whole book for you, discuss it with you. I don't know, maybe. But for now, أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منا والممات وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين وما علي إلا البلاغ المبين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.